you all for coming, and all the fans and readers and customers that are coming too. I appreciate it. And just sit down and enjoy yourself. We've got food over here. Great.
Thank you.
My name is Kathryn J Atwood, and I started writing this series. I started writing the first edition of this book back in 2008. I signed the contract with Chicago Free Press, and one book led to another. I was turning the proofs in for this one, the corrected proofs, and my editor said, well, the centennial of World War I's coming up, so why don't you write one on that? And so I wrote this one, and then I wrote one on the Pacific Theater, and then the Vietnam War. And so I wrote this first book, I wrote with young adults in mind. I wrote with my own 12-year-old self, very undermotivated student who loved to read, with that person in mind, and I wrote this in such a way that it's not fictionalized. The facts of the women's stories are not fictionalized at all, but the facts are arranged in such a way to make them interesting and make them interesting reading, gripping stories. So I did a lot of searches. I did some Google searches. I did searches through collective biographies and found stories that women who fought fascism in the European theater. That's what this book is. And then the other book was Pacific Theater, same thing, and the same thing here. But so I organized each book a little differently. So this one I organized by the roles that women played in World War I. Medics, resistors, soldiers. This one I organized by country, and the same with the Pacific Theater. And then this one, because the Vietnam War, I was a kid during the Vietnam War, but I didn't understand it because obviously it wasn't being taught in schools until possibly the 80s. But this one I organized chronologically so I could understand the war, and then my readers could too. So they all have a bit of a different organization, but they're all women who did amazing things, who did things that maybe general public didn't think that they were capable of doing, or maybe they didn't even think they were capable of doing until they got called on to do whatever it was that they did. I was writing poetry, getting some poetry published in decent magazines. I was also doing a lot of book reviews, and one of the publishers for whom I was doing book reviews was the Chicago Free Press. And I happened to meet one of the acquisitions editors just very serendipitously, and she said, "Oh, I want to start a series on historical women," because her daughter was watching TV and said, "Where's the women's stories?" And my dad was a World War II vet. He had two basic stories that he always told us. He was in the Army Air Forces, and so World War II was in my mind. Corrie ten Boom's story came to theaters when I was in high school, and so World War II was just sort of in my genetic material in my childhood. And so when she said she wanted to start a series on historical women, I thought, well, World War II is my interest, so that's why I started with this one. And then one thing led to another. She was a very encouraging editor who kept me going. And then the Pacific Theater, I thought, why do we all know about the European theater? We don't know anything about the Pacific Theater. Why do we think of the Germans as the prototypical evil villains of all time? And the Japanese fascists they did a lot of cruel things. They did their own Holocaust in China. And I thought, people should know about that, because whenever there's cruelty on such a huge scale, there's also heroes. So there's heroes on the Pacific Theater side, and so I wanted to explore all of that. And so that's why I wrote the Pacific Theater book. But that was a very difficult book to write, because there was something very, very oppressive about the Pacific Theater. And so it was difficult to write, but I think that's my best written book of all of them, because I was finally hitting my stride, I think. That was my third collective biography. And then Pearl Witherington's memoir came out, I think,
right before the World War I.
Right before this one, yeah. So that was the second book that came out, and then this was the last one. And I just wrote this one because I really wanted to understand the war that had kind of swirled throughout my childhood. I had older cousins who were medics in the war, but I didn't know anything about it except that. And so I really wanted to understand it myself. And this one actually has one of those gold stickers that looks like the Newbery Medal, that is not the Newbery Medal. It's the Junior Library Guild Gold Standard. And a lot of books get that. But it was the highest honored book of all my books, and I'm very proud of it. And it was great to write it. It was really fun.
This is the Army, Mr. Green. We like the barracks nice and clean. You had a housemaid to sweep the floor, but she won't help you out